Yeah, yeah, of course. Yep. Sure. Yeah, sounds great.
Good evening, everyone. Just ask those who are not seated yet if you could just find your seat and we'll be all ready to get started. My name's Quentin Robinson. I'm going to be the moderator for our event tonight, and I would like to welcome you all here tonight on behalf of Sustainable Brandon. We're a community-based, volunteer-led, nonprofit organization, and our mission is to work for and advocate and educate for a healthy environment in our city, to provide a pleasant and prosperous home for current and future generations. We work to preserve and enhance green spaces, promote biodiversity, and very importantly for tonight, work to try and reduce greenhouse gas emissions to prevent or limit further damage caused by climate change. So gathered here in this place, we acknowledge that we are gathered on Treaty 2 land, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Dakota Sioux, Ojibwe, Cree, Oji-Cree, and Dene peoples, and home of the Métis Nation. We are all treaty people, and we share the responsibility of stewardship of the land and the air and the water on which we all and all living things depend. May we grow in a spirit of reconciliation and learn to partner in the care of these precious lands. As we begin, just want to give a shout out to the Knox Green Team, who has collaborated with Sustainable Brandon and really helped to make this space available for us here tonight. So thanks very much for that. And a very important part of being a moderator is to make sure at the start of an event that everybody knows where the washrooms are in the building. So straight out the back doors there, turn left, go to the end of the hall, and then down the stairs, and you'll be looking straight forward at the washrooms. And if stairs are difficult, there's also an elevator in the hallway that you're able to use to get down to that level. So just want to talk a little bit about some hopes and expectations for the evening, sort of set some of the guidelines and ground rules for our gathering here. Given that we're living in times in which there's increasing polarization over lots of issues, and some of those issues may include things related to what we're talking about tonight, just want to remind everyone that in times when civil discourse starts to become uncivil discourse, that we would really like to clarify that we want tonight to be respecting one another, whether we agree or disagree with one another. Our hope and expectation will be that we'll do that respectfully and not be reverting to things like name calling or insults, things like that. And also that when the question time comes, we'll be respectful with the sharing of time. When we open the floor for questions, we invite folks to offer their question or comment and take a couple of minutes to do that, and then make space for the next person so that all may be heard. And in my role, I'll be helping to ensure that that happens. A couple of other things that are important to clarify in light of some things that have happened at another meeting is that really important to recognize that there's no one here tonight who's employed by Manitoba Hydro or any level of government, nor the company that's proposing the carbon capture project. There's nobody here employed or working for in any way any of those organizations. What we have here tonight is folks who have researched the topics we're looking at and looked into that information, all of which is on the public record, and to sort through that and think about what's the nature of these projects and what are some potential consequences of these projects so that we can all end up being a little bit better informed about these things. And just want to remind people, like the topics tonight are talking about the gas-fired turbine and about direct air carbon capture. Those are our topics for the night. You know, at any meeting, we can get tempted sometimes to head off in different directions, that maybe want to talk about the flight path of migrating North American songbirds, or, you know, the economics of raising ducks in Patagonia, or sort of debate the reality of whether climate change is a real thing or not. Just a reminder, those are not the topics that we're looking at for tonight. We're talking about the gas-fired turbines, talking about direct air capture, and what those things are about, and what consequences there might be for having such projects in our area. So, without further ado, we're very fortunate to have with us members of the Climate Action Team Manitoba. We have here Megan Mast, who is Communications Manager, and Kakika Thundersky, who you would have maybe met on the way in, who's a Rural and Northern Outreach Coordinator. And we also have James Wilt, who is the Team Policy Manager. We're privileged to have them here to share information and guide our exploration of our topics for the evening. From the interactions that we have had with the Climate Action Team, we found that they do a great job of learning and then sharing what they have learned about many aspects related to climate change. Their work in advocacy and education is a great gift to those of us who share a concern about climate change. And so I'm now pleased to invite James to come and share the outcome of his work with us.
Sure. Thanks, Quentin. This is on? Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Quentin. Thanks to Sustainable Brandon. Thanks to everyone coming out tonight. As mentioned, my name's James. I'm with Climate Action Team Manitoba, and tonight we're going to be walking through the two projects that Quentin mentioned. So the first is the proposed gas-fired power plants in Brandon, and the second is the direct air capture in Pipestone area. So next slide, please. So first I'll go through intros, who we are, what we're about, go through the overview of the two projects. We'll then talk about some proposed alternatives to this trajectory and some of our concerns with the trajectory as stated, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. There is a lot of detail that we could go in about these two projects. I've tried to keep it detailed but not overwhelming. With that said, if there are any things that we want to go into deeper after the fact, there'll be lots of opportunity too. So next slide, please. So this is Climate Action Team. This is staff and board. So as mentioned, there's Megan, there's Kakake. There's also Laura, who is our director. There's Madron, who does outreach and organizing. And then there is a new staff member, Bobby, who is our program and operations coordinator. So we're made up of we're a coalition of 5 different organizations that you'll see on the bottom of our banner, but also there. So it's Green Action Center, Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives, Manitoba, Wilderness Committee Manitoba, Manitoba Energy Justice Coalition, and Climate Change Connection. So next slide, please. Quentin kind of did this disclaimer already, but we are not affiliated with the government in any way. Our funding comes from 2 foundations, McConnell and Trottier. We don't receive any funding beyond that. And our goal is really to do the kind of work that we're doing tonight, which is getting together in community, sharing the information that we have come across, and trying to build a grassroots movement that can help to push for better policies in the province. Next slide. So this is, we're going to start by talking about the work on clean electricity. This is just a very brief overview of some of the work we've done. There is the reports that is on the front table if you're interested, and it's talking about the potential for wind, solar, and energy storage in Manitoba. We've been interviewed about this. We've done a lot of blog posts exploring this. And then more recently, with the proposed gas-fired power plant, we've been talking about what it is, what some of our concerns are, and why we don't think it's the right solution to some of the issues that Manitoba is facing when it comes to electricity. So next slide, please. So this is, again, very surface level, 101. What is Manitoba's electricity system? Just sort of starting at the basic level. As many of you will probably know, Manitoba is predominantly, almost exclusively powered by hydroelectric dams. There's 16 of them in the province, and 3 of them are the biggest ones, all up near Gillam, which power, that's Limestone, Kettle, and Long Spruce. They account for 60% of all electricity. And then there's, of course, the current Brandon generating station. Used to be coal, switched to natural gas. So that's about 280 megawatts. And then there's also 2 wind farm contracts in the south of the province, St. Joseph and St. Leon. And then there's also export-import agreements. And so in terms of domestic capacity, this is about 6,000 megawatts of installed capacity. I won't get into the difference between installed and actual real capacity factors, but it's a significant amount of electricity. So a large dam, a large nuclear reactor is in the ballpark of 1,000 megawatts, slightly larger, slightly smaller. So it's a significant amount. About 3/4 of this electricity is used in Manitoba. The largest consumer is commercial, then residential, and then industrial. And then the rest is exported to the US, but increasingly to Saskatchewan and some to Ontario. Next slide, please. So Manitoba is facing 2 different but somewhat related issues when it comes to the electricity system. So the first one is what Hydro is very focused on at the moment is the wintertime peak demand shortfall. And so this is, Manitoba has a winter peaking system, so this means that the most electricity used at any point in the year happens on the coldest days or the coldest nights of the year, and it's usually for a couple of hours. And so the records that Manitoba has hit was in January 20th, 2025, when it hit 5,120 megawatts hitting the grid at the same time. Tremendous amount of electricity, and so Manitoba Hydro is increasingly concerned that it's not going to be able to meet that demand without additional power. And so this is where the gas-fired turbines come into the discussion. So next slide. This is going to be a little difficult to see, but this is sort of the graph of the longer-term demand. And so this is the second piece of what Manitoba Hydro is facing. So we've got the 2029, 2030 shortfall, and then we've just got the long-term demand growth. And so Manitoba Hydro is basically expecting electricity demand and therefore production to have to double in the next several decades. And so this is an enormous amount of electricity, so the question is obviously where that's going to come from. And so the different lines represent different scenarios in terms of the rate of electrification and sort of other situations that Manitoba Hydro is expecting. So those are the 2 big pieces, the wintertime peak capacity shortfall and then the longer term demand growth. And this demand growth chart was produced last year. So obviously as we're looking at AI data centers, which I'm not going to be talking about tonight, but is obviously of concern in Manitoba, that is going to increase this graph in particular. So next slide, please. So this is the back and forth that the current provincial government has gone through in terms of its commitments to a net zero electricity grid. So net zero is different than absolute zero, and this is where the second half of this presentation comes in, is net zero means that it doesn't have to hit zero emissions per se, it's just it has to be netted out with some sort of carbon capture. Excuse me. So in October 2023, when the NDP government was first elected, their mandate letter to Manitoba Hydro was sort of aligned with federal ambitions of a net zero electricity grid by 2035. April 2025, they backed away from that. They said, we're not going to do that anymore. And this was shortly after Hydro had announced its plans to build what was then a 500 megawatts gas-fired turbine. And then in October 2025, so about 6 months later, in the Pathway to Net Zero, which is Manitoba's latest climate plan, they recommitted to net zero by 2035. So it's been back and forth, which has confused us a bit. I think it's confused a lot of people as to what the government's actual goal is. And again, this is where the second half of the discussion today will come in. Next slide, please. So this is the proposal. Some of you may already be well familiar with this. So Manitoba Hydro is planning to build a 750 megawatt fossil gas-fired power plant right next to the existing plant. And so as mentioned, there's already a 250-ish megawatts plant in Brandon. And so it is expected to add another 750 megawatts, retain the 250 megawatts, so there would be about a gigawatts worth of natural gas generation on that site. So this, again, this will be a little difficult to see, but the current gas-fired power plant is in the middle of those two squares, and the yellow boundary is where the new site is proposed. And so this will also require additional transmission and distribution infrastructure, as well as 2 new pipelines. So it is a significant project, and it's estimated to cost $3 billion. I'll talk about it a bit later, but in February 2025, this project was initially proposed as 500 megawatts for $1.4 billion, and then about 6 months later, that was upgraded to 750 megawatts for $3 billion. We can talk about why that cost inflation has been so significant, but there hasn't been a ton of explanation from government or hydro as to what happened between the 500 and 750 megawatts and that big price expansion. Next slide, please. So I won't go too into the details, but the specifics of the gas turbines is that there's several types of gas-fired power plants, but the main two is there's a simple cycle gas turbine, which is what is being proposed for Brandon. It's what the current station is. There's also another type called combined cycle gas turbine. That one is far more efficient, and it can produce a lot more power. However, it is a lot more expensive in terms of upfront capital costs. And so what we have and what we're looking at is a simple cycle gas turbine. They're extremely quick to start up, 5 to 10 minutes, and so this is why they're often used to meet peak electricity demand. If there's fluctuations in the grid, they can be brought online very quickly. However, they are very inefficient, they're very expensive to run, and they're very emissions intensive to operate. And so you may not be able to see it in this graph, but there's the compressor, there's a combustion chamber, the turbine. About 2/3 of the fuel is lost as heat, and it's only 1/3 which actually makes it into the form of electricity. And so what combined cycle does is basically captures that heat and uses it to spin another turbine, and so it's increasing the capacity of that. So next slide, please. So hydro's case for the project is that it will run for between 0.5 and 5% of the year. And so this is during the coldest nights of the year when electricity demand is the highest. This is especially from space heating of buildings, and so this is why we hear the term peaker plants, is it's, when electricity demand peaks, the plant comes online for an hour or two to meet that, and then it will turn back off. The other reason that they have flagged as needing this is because of increasing droughts and the impacts that is having on hydroelectric dams and reservoirs and the ability for that generation to keep up with this and other sorts of extreme weather events. So it's being proposed as sort of a catch-all for when the system is otherwise failing for this to be brought online. This graph basically shows sort of the wintertime peaking. This is what I was talking about before in terms of the wintertime peak is, and you'll see the fluctuations. That's the electricity up and down throughout the month. But again, it's during the early mornings and the late afternoons or early evenings when people are coming home, turning on the lights, or in the mornings when they're making coffee and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. So there's a couple of additional claims that Hydro is making about this particular project. So one is they argue that this power plant isn't actually an alternative to renewables, and it's actually necessary to support their integration. So they will point to a lot of other jurisdictions that will bring these online, and then when intermittent generation like wind or solar fluctuates due to the fact that they are weather dependent, this peaker plant can come online to augment that. The second point that they will make is that the fossil gas will eventually be replaced with hydrogen, biomethane, or biodiesel, or offsets or credits will be used to eventually achieve that net zero electricity emissions target. Again, this is where part 2 comes into the picture. And then the third piece is that they argue that alternatives such as grid-scale battery storage remain too expensive, too unproven to rely on. So these are all things that are bolstering their claim and why they argue that the $3 billion plant is worth it for Manitoba. Next slide, please. So CAT has a lot of concerns about this particular project, but there's 4 in particular that I'll walk through tonight. We can talk about these, we can talk about other ones if we like, but the first is the emissions and air pollution associated with the project. And this is especially given that we don't actually have any guarantee it will only be used 0.5 to 5% of the time. Now, I'll talk about it in a second, but the way that it is conditioned is that, again, it's very expensive to run it because it's such an inefficient plant. And so that's why hydro will say, well, we're just not going to run it that much because we can otherwise import electricity from elsewhere. But there's a lot of unknowns about how often it will actually be used. So that's point 1. Point 2 is that we argue that there's actually no real-world pathway to the low-carbon fuels that they are talking about. So whether that's hydrogen, biomethane, biodiesel, or the credits and offsets that they're talking about, we just don't see that there's a realistic prospect to this, and especially the size of the power plant and the amount of fuel it requires. And there are times where hydro will admit this. They'll say on the record that things like biomethane just can't be produced at the necessary scale. But that's a secondary concern that we have. The third is what we would call outdated and incorrect assumptions about wind, solar, and energy storage. And the fourth rather is that $3 billion, it's an enormous amount of money and it's an enormous opportunity cost. And I'll talk about what opportunity cost means in this context, but this is just an overview of the 4 major concerns. Next slide, please. This is too many numbers, but I just wanted to give some concretes of like what we're talking about with this project. So both emissions and air pollution from the power plant, of course, depends on how often it is used. And this is why hydro says it shouldn't be of a concern to us. And so they talk about the 0.5 to 5%, which is already a significant margin. That's a 10 times margin. But what's worth noting is that it was 6% in 2023. That's only 1% higher. We don't have 2024 or 25 numbers, but we know the past few years have been very bad in terms of drought, causing the hydro deficits, and so it would not be surprising if it was higher than that. The emissions intensity of operating this plant, these numbers or that first number, the 532 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent per megawatt hour, that's hydro's number. So it's very easy just to calculate that based on the actual percentage that it would be used. So I won't go through all the numbers. They're there if you want to see them, but I'll just flag the last one. So the 13% of the year, that is a US average in 2022 of how often single-cycle combustion turbines were used. And again, there's a lot of different reasons for that in terms of increasing loads from data centers, droughts, all sorts of things which are creating conditions for it to be used more than it otherwise would be or planned to be. But 13%, as you can tell, is a whole lot more than 0.5 to 5%. And so that would be equivalent to about half a megaton of carbon dioxide. And these numbers don't include the widespread methane leakage, which is part of the fossil gas system. So that's at the wellhead, that's at the pipeline, the compressor stations. There is a great deal of methane which is unfortunately lost through these, and methane has a global warming potential which is a lot higher than carbon dioxide when it isn't burnt, so that's of serious concern. Below that is showing you how these things compare to some local industries. And so the Coke fertilizer plant is the largest point source emitter in Manitoba. In 2023, it emitted 640,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And so that's just to give you an idea. If the power plant is indeed used for, say, 13%, it would be in the ballpark of some of the largest industrial emitters in the province. Now, again, there may be years where it's used less, there may be years where it's used more, but we don't buy the argument from hydro that we should just trust them that it won't be used, because we've seen in a lot of other jurisdictions that's not how it's used. And then there's 2 other examples. Brady Road landfill is a huge emitter in Winnipeg. That's the largest landfill in the province. And then also Trans-Canada pipelines, just, again, to power the compressor stations, there's a lot of natural gas that's burned. So, again, too many numbers, but that's just to give you an idea of sort of what we're talking about when we're talking about emissions. Next slide. The second piece, which is unfortunately talked about less, is the air pollution that comes from burning fossil fuels. And so natural gas is relatively cleaner burning than coal, and I that's not the issue that we're facing today, and it is good that coal was phased out at that power plant. However, burning natural gas still emits significant air pollution, particularly nitrogen oxides, also known as NOx, and this is part of the combustion process interacting with the nitrogen in the atmosphere. So NOx can increase the risk of respiratory issues, especially for people with asthma. And it's also a major contributor to particulate matter and to ozone, which contributes to smog. And so if used for 5% of the year, this plant will emit about 115 tons of NOx per year. If it's used for 10%, it would be 230 tons. And the last point there is important. Most NOx in the province and the world comes from combustion in vehicles, which are mobile sources. The reason that this is of concern, I mean, it's of concern because of the amount, but it's also, it's a stationary emitter. And so this is all coming from one spot, and it's all going to be emitting into the direct area. Next slide. This isn't a hard and fast rule. This is just a 3-mile buffer, which the Environmental Protection Agency in the US has historically used to do studies of immediate local impacts of air pollution from power plants. Again, this isn't meant to be prescriptive. It's not to say that there are specific outcomes, but this is that is a 3-mile or 5-kilometer buffer around where the power plant is on the map. And so it's a decent amount of Brandon, and it's a decent amount of surrounding area. And so it's not the only thing that is going to be emitting nitrous oxide, but it is nitrogen oxide rather, but it's a significant one, and especially because it's a local one. That's what matters. Next slide, please. So point 2, this is around the alternative fuels. And so the case that hydro is making is, okay, we might be using fossil gas for the interim, but we will have biomethane from landfills or from farms or from wastewater treatment plants or these sorts of things, or we will have hydrogen, green hydrogen, which is produced basically by using clean electricity to create the hydrogen and then converting that back to power. And so they argue that, yeah, it might be not ideal for the near future, but by 2035 or beyond, we're hoping to see these industries in Manitoba. We would argue that that's not viable at scale, and scale is really the important piece here. There are projects around the world. So for example, biomethane is really big in parts of Europe where they have larger agricultural sectors, and these are largely on-farm or small-scale, so we're talking 10, 20, 30 megawatts, which is nothing to sneeze at, but it's also certainly not 750 megawatts worth. So firstly, hydrogen it's extremely expensive and it's inefficient. So I was talking about the inefficiencies of the single-cycle combustion turbine, which already disadvantages it. But the round-trip efficiency when you actually go through the conversion process and when you're combusting it back into electricity means that you have about 4 units of energy for every 1 unit of output. And so you have a round-trip efficiency of 25%, which is really not good, and that makes it cost prohibitive in a lot of situations. As mentioned, biomethane is not scalable. It risks entrenching a lot of not ideal practices, and it could worsen the crisis of methane leakage. Biomethane is materially the same as natural gas or fossil gas, and so if that leaks in terms of capturing it or transporting it, injecting it into the system, it can have the same effects. And so we would argue that fossil gas would remain by far the most dominant fuel. There may be tiny contributions of hydrogen or biomethane injected into the system, but we would argue it would really barely make a dent in terms of the power plant's overall emissions. Next slide, please. I won't get into this too much because this is part 2 of the presentation, but we also argue that the credits in the offset system that hydro is examining can't be relied on. And so hydro lists a lot of different carbon dioxide removal or negative emissions technologies, including bioenergy with carbon capture and sequestration, also known as BECCS. There's afforestation or reforestation, and so this is planting trees. There's soil carbon sequestration and biochar applications to soil. And then there's direct air capture, which we'll be talking about second. And so I won't go too into the details now, but again, major concerns with costs, with scalability, and there's also concerns with offsets around things like additionality and permanence, and so whether carbon that is captured in a certain technology or approach will actually remain there for hundreds or thousands of years. And so we argue that it's much more effective to prevent these emissions from entering the atmosphere in the first place than attempting to remove them after the fact. But I'll get more into that in part 2 of the presentation. Next slide. Part 3 is around, we would argue that it really downplays the potential for renewables and storage in the province. And so Manitoba Hydro, quite curiously, has a really long-standing skepticism and dislike of wind power and solar power. And I mentioned this at the very end, but I think what's interesting is that the Dakotas have a phenomenal amount of wind power. So North Dakota now has 4,500 megawatts of wind power. South Dakota has about 3,500 megawatts. Manitoba has about 250 megawatts. And so, you know, it's not like North Dakota and South Dakota don't face problems of cold weather. They certainly do. Yet they still have managed to bring on a phenomenal amount of this, and it's working really well for them. And it's not, you know, sort of the urban elites jurisdictions. These are, you know, pretty red states. And so I won't go too into the weeds here, but it's a particular frustration is every couple of years, Hydro has to do what's called an integrated resource plan. So it's, you know, where they have to come up with the next 10 years of what they're planning to do. And for some reason, they insist on singling out wind power in particular as having a wintertime peak capacity of 20%. And that's a problem for a whole bunch of reasons, but basically it is technically disadvantaging this when we know that it can reach far higher capacities and contribute far more to the grid than is being identified in their modeling. It's also worth noting that there's no mention in terms of when they do their little asterisks of forced outages and maintenance for gas plants. Gas plants, unfortunately, all energy technologies face challenges in wintertime, and gas plants are no exception to that. There's the closely related issue in the integrated resource plan of the IRP of basically shortchanging batteries, saying that they have overly high cost or short asset lives. We have talked to many people who are in this industry, and they say that hydro is basically several years out of date on this, and they're just ignoring other energy storage solutions that would actually help intermittent power work in Manitoba. And we also know that hydro reservoirs serve as basically gigantic batteries. Now, this is a challenge in the present because of the droughts that we're facing, but nevertheless, we need to think of hydro as having the opportunity to, when we put more electricity onto the grid, we don't have to run the hydroelectric generators. We can hold them behind reservoirs until when they're most needed and when we might not be getting electricity from other sources. And one of the main export destinations for Manitoba's excess electricity is to North Dakota, which has backstopped a lot of its wind power. And so we've basically shipped off a lot of the potential for Manitoba to build out its own domestic industry to North Dakota. Next slide. This is just a graph that shows the global surge in battery installations. This is actually only from 2024. The numbers have only got better since. But the average battery pack price has just been plummeting, it continues to drop, and as a result, installations are going through the roof, including in places like California, Texas, a lot of the states. And Ontario, actually. Ontario is now on the road to installing 3,000 megawatts of energy storage by the end of the decade, whereas Manitoba has none. Next slide, please. We have a little brief on this at the back if you're interested, but there are also a lot of successful cold weather projects. We get this a lot in terms of the ability for wind power to operate in the cold, but also for batteries to operate in the cold. There's regular installations of battery energy storage in northern Finland and northern Norway at the Arctic Circle, and they're functional, they're working, and if they can work there, we argue that they can work in Manitoba as well. Next slide. This is where the opportunity cost piece comes in, and it's fairly intuitive. You know, if we're spending $3 billion on one thing, we can't spend $3 billion on something else. So I've mentioned the difference in price and capacity, which has happened since February 2025. The throne speech was in November 2025. There wasn't really an explanation of what had changed. I mean, obviously, the tariffs to the south have impacted some of that, but in terms of why the price so significantly spiked and why other options haven't been evaluated, it wasn't really looked at too closely. And so One thing that we would also flag is that the $3 billion price tag does not include the cost of fuel for the lifetime of the plant. And because of the inefficiencies of the plant, if it ends up being used more than what's expected, this could really add up and it could impact us as ratepayers. So I think this is something that, in terms of just the cost effectiveness of the choices that we make. And they also mentioned a significant reputational risk for Manitoba Hydro. Manitoba Hydro is well over 99% renewable energy, with just a 0.1% basically at this point of fossil gas. This has enabled a lot of positive developments in terms of industries, seen that as a net positive. However, Hydro itself has flagged that this may result in a degradation of that over time. Next slide, please. So with all that said, the decision itself is not final. This is from the 2025 IRP. They note that Hydro is currently securing manufacturing slots because of the surge in interest in gas turbines to power basically AI data centers. They have put their name on the list to maintain its position in the procurement queue. However, they say that there will be contractual off-ramps to allow for deferral or cancellation if the full capacity is not needed. And so that's something that we are trying to ask Hydro, trying to ask politicians is this full 750 megawatts necessary? Have we looked at more cost-effective options on the table? Next slide. And this is just a list of timelines or opportunities, depending on how you view it. These are some of the big things that are coming up. Manitoba Hydro is running an online survey, which closes on March 31st. It's a little tricky to find, and take it with a grain of salt as to how much they may listen to it or not, but you can voice your interest in the project there. There's what's called a major new facility review with the Public Utilities Board, also known as the PUB, so that will be filed. Hydro is currently in its engagement process, and so I know that they have done events here in Brandon and surrounding area about the possibility of the plant and the necessary infrastructure. The PUB hearings will conclude end of summer 2026, and then the licensing decision follows that. And then the hope for Hydro is that construction will start in early to mid 2028 with commissioning in summer of 2030. So that's kind of the rough timeline that we're looking at. Oops. Next slide, please. Apologies for maybe not being able to quite parse this, but something else that is interesting in the IRP is that this is not the end of Manitoba Hydro's interest in gas-fired power plants. And so that blip that you see of the red, that is in 2030 when the gas plant will come online in Brandon. And it will hold steady for a while, but then it will continue to increase. So Hydro is proposing, it hasn't officially proposed, but this is sort of what they call their recommended development plan, is that in the end of the 2030s, that much more gas firepower would come online. The green is the wind power in terms of capacity, and so you'll see it quickly gets outstripped. And it actually starts to hit a little decline, and that's because of the retirements of St. Joseph and St. Leon, so they'll hit the end of their lifetimes. And so, you'll see two very sort of diverging pathways for Hydro's vision of electricity generation. Next slide. So this will turn to direct air capture, and these things are related. I hope that you'll see. Beyond just geography, it's also a lot about electricity, how power is being used, and a lot of other resources, including water, may be used. But this is a quick overview of our work on direct air capture, and so we wrote a report. It was actually the first report I wrote for Climate Action Team, was on why we argue direct air capture isn't a solution for Manitoba. And then we responded to Deep Sky's official proposal when that came out, and we've also done various media interviews about the subject. And of course, we came out to Pipestone a while ago. It was very graciously hosted by some folks who are here tonight. And so, yeah, we'll continue to do this work based on what we hear or don't hear from Deep Sky. Next slide, please. So this will be familiar to some of you in the room, but direct air capture is it's a type of negative emissions technology, or net, and it's also a type of carbon dioxide removal. And so the case that is made for direct air capture is that unlike some other quote-unquote technologies like planting a forest, in which the carbon would be sucked out of the atmosphere and stored in the tree for its lifetime. It would offer permanence, because of course if that tree goes up in flames, then all of that carbon is lost back to the atmosphere. And so by taking, I'll go through the how this actually works, but they argue by capturing it and then injecting it underground, then that gives the opportunity for thousands of years of permanence. They also argue that it offers greater ability to monitor and to verify, and so this is really important for carbon offsetting, which I mentioned before, you've probably heard about elsewhere. Importantly, this is similar, but it is not the same as conventional carbon capture and storage, also known as CCS. They've added another letter to that, which is CCUS, carbon capture utilization and storage. But typically that is installed over the stack of a power plant or a cement factory, or any type of industrial facility. It's usually natural gas or coal-fired power plants. For example, in Boundary Dam in Estevan, Saskatchewan, that was the biggest one in Canada so far. And so that uses highly concentrated CO2 streams to capture it, to split it basically, and to release the rest of the air into the atmosphere. In comparison to that, direct air capture works to capture the CO2 from the ambient atmosphere. And so we're now looking at 425-ish parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is an issue in terms of climate change. But when it comes to an engineering problem, a technical problem of trying to capture that and remove that, it really is like trying to get a few pieces of sand out of a sandbox. It's very, very challenging technically, but more so it is very, very energy intensive, which we'll talk about in a second. Next slide. This is a very crude but somewhat effective demonstration of the difference between direct air capture, which is on the left, and just conventional CCS, which is on the right. Next slide. So there is a difference also with these technologies and what's termed enhanced oil recovery, or EOR. This has been used in the oil industry for many, many decades. Basically, carbon dioxide, which is captured from mostly processing natural gas, will be injected underground in order to access otherwise depleted reservoirs, and so as to enable the extraction of more oil. These can actually overlap with CCS and direct air capture, in the sense that one of the ways that companies will, especially in the States, will see a commercial pathway for this is to install direct air capture, capture CO2, and then use that to inject underground. That is not what Deep Sky is proposing, and we can talk about that more later, but it's just an important differentiation between enhanced oil recovery and other options. Next slide. So this comes to Deep Sky. In a second, I'll talk about who is Deep Sky, but just so that we're all on the same page about what the project is. If it was built, it would be one of the largest, if not the largest, direct air capture facilities. It would be built in either the RM of Two Borders or Pipestone, unless I'm mistaken, that decision still hasn't been made in terms of location. It would be built in 3 phases. The first phase is 30,000 tons, and so that's 0.03 megatons of CO2. Phase 2 is 100,000 tons, and phase 3 is 500,000 tons, or 0.5 megatons of CO2 per year. From what we understand, what Deep Sky has said publicly, this will use what's called a solid sorbent technology. This is in comparison to a liquid solvent technology. And the reason I bring it up here is because it will use lower heat and water input versus what is used with liquid solvents, which tends to use natural gas in order to generate massive amounts of heat. The reason liquid solvents tend to be used in terms of this infrastructure is it can capture far more, at least in theory, it can capture far more carbon dioxide. Deep Sky has said that the surface facility would begin construction in summer 2026. That is only a couple months away. I'll talk a little bit in a second about the company's credibility in terms of what they say, but that is what they have said so far. Next slide, please. So who is Deep Sky? They are a Montreal-based startup. They were founded by the executives of a travel app called Hopper, and then also the former chief financial officer of Airbnb. They're financially backed by many venture capital firms. One particularly noteworthy name is Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy Catalyst, but it's also received $25 million in funding from the Quebec government. And a number of months ago, the so-called Alpha facility in central Alberta in Innisfail opened. It aims to capture 3,000 tons per year, testing what they say about 10 different technologies. The last time I looked at their website, they have about 3 up and running. But again, it's tough to say what is and what isn't happening there. They are not injecting the CO2 underground at Alpha. They're actually trucking it 3 hours north and then injecting it there. And there's questions, of course, about any potential for leakage. If any of that leaks, then the whole point of the operation is further compromised. So yeah, Deep Sky is venture capital based or backed, and it's directed. So a lot of their board is made up by venture capital. Just generally speaking, the eventual goal of venture capital firms is to get acquired by a larger company or to get to go public with an initial public offering. And either way, the goal is to generate large returns for early investors. And I don't think it is hyperbolic to say that this can lead to what's known as a hype cycle. These companies are attempting to attract investments in order to actualize the often extreme promises that they are making. And so they will often oversell the readiness of their technology. So the project itself is banking on some pretty incredible future technological advances. And so this is especially around the projected electricity use. When you compare it to the size of each phase, we see a pretty dramatic drop. And that's not really explained. You know, when you talk to them, they just say, we hope that this will happen, essentially. And there's also been some very significant turnover in recent months in the company, and so this includes not only the CEO, but also the Chief Science and Commercial Officer, who was basically the brains of the operation. They both left the company. Next slide. And not only did the brains of the operation leave the company, I think it's on the following slide, but he said to the media that he doesn't think that the technology will work on the timelines that it needs to. So that's a tell. This will be difficult to read, but this on the left is some documents that we got from a Freedom of Information request, and on the right is a visualization of the lobbying registry that this company has done with the province. And on the left, I can share slides, by the way. I apologize for the size of this, but on the left, the company was responding to the first round of legislation that the government brought in around carbon capture, and they were saying that there are multiple issues that need to be rectified with amendments, which we're now expecting at some point. This includes who is responsible, or who is rather legally liable for the captured carbon dioxide after the company's walked away. And there is also some things that they were bringing up about the treatment of protected areas and also just landholder rights. And so these are things that the company has been lobbying the province to further amend in order to make it economically viable for it to proceed. Next slide, please. As mentioned, there's a lot of contradictory information. I'm not trying to claim anything about the intent of the company per se. But it has been confusing for myself, and I think for others who have been trying to make sense of this project and what it would mean to their community. For example, land use of the project. Either way, it's not a significant amount of land, but 60 versus 145 acres, those are two pretty significantly different numbers. Jobs, we've heard everything from 700 in construction and 100 permanent to 750 to 1,000 construction jobs and 100 and 250 permanent. I've even seen it as low as 50 permanent, and so it's kind of bouncing all over the place in terms of how they're selling it to the local community. The carbon capture, as I mentioned, phase 3 is now looking at 500,000 tons, but in some of their materials they talk to up to 1 million tons. And then the investment into the community with this project, they've talked about 500 million, 750 million. It's kind of all over the map, and depending on who you're talking to at the company, you may receive a slightly different answer. Next slide. So this brings us to the 5 major issues with direct air capture. So I'll go through each of these one by one, as I did with the power plant. The first is that no large-scale proof of concept actually exists in the world of this technology. Second is that the technology has extremely high costs. Third is that it consumes an enormous amount of energy, water, and materials. Fourth is that the economic feasibility relies on actually selling these carbon offsets or the commercial use of the CO2. And finally, we would argue that public investment in direct air capture would delay rapid and achievable decarbonization in other sectors. Next slide. So firstly, with the no large-scale proof of concept. When I say large-scale, I mean the type of scale that they are hoping for. So, 30,000, 100,000. There is no facility in the world that is anywhere near this. There's about 24 direct air capture facilities in the world at this point, and cumulative, they are capturing about 0.01 megatons of carbon dioxide per year. Even if all 15 facilities in development as of 2024 came into operation, the total capture would still only be about 3 megatons of CO2 per year. For context, Manitoba's annual greenhouse gas emissions is 21 megatons. And so even if all of the direct air capture facilities came online, it would be a fraction of Manitoba's emissions. And the largest facility in operation, which is Climeworks Mammoth, it's supposed to be 32,000 tons per year in Iceland. It's been plagued with issues, including what we may expect with a Manitoba-based project is the parts will freeze in the cold weather. Next slide. So this is a investigative report by some Icelandic journalists that came out in mid-2025, and they looked into both of Climeworks, which is the Icelandic company, and they found it only has been capturing a fraction of the CO2 that has been that's been actually built for the installed capacity. And this is something we've seen in conventional carbon capture and storage projects, which again are technically a lot easier to pull off because you are putting it on top of a stack where very high concentrations of CO2 are emitting. And so we're seeing with direct air capture that so far, at least, it has not lived up to the fairly modest promises it's made. Next. This is what I was referring to before. This is Phil DeLuna, who is the Chief Science and Commercial Officer. So he left the company to work in a different area of decarbonization. And a couple of months afterwards, he came out and said that Deep Sky's carbon removal technology is too slow and it's too expensive. And so from someone who was very much deep in it selling this in terms of its technological readiness, I think that this is a pretty significant indictment of it. Next slide. Yeah, so that brings us to the extremely high cost. It is the single most expensive form of carbon removal in terms of availability today. And so proponents, at least historically, have talked about how they the gold standard is to one day reach a level of $100 per ton. This is US dollars, by the way, but this figure is being revised upwards to $200, $300. Not that it is today, but what they are hoping to get to one day. But there's experts who study this kind of thing very closely, and they argue that it will likely remain between $600 and $1,000 per ton of CO2 for the indefinite future. And so, when we are sort of hearing the claims that these companies are making to having really low cost carbon removal that can be competitive with other technologies, it's just not nearly there yet. Next slide, please. A lot of this cost comes down to the extremely high energy demand required. And when I say energy, I mean electricity in this case. And so this is mostly for generating the heat for the capture process and for the separation process. Deep Sky's projected electricity consumption, again, I would advise this being taken with a grain of salt, but phase 1 has been projected at 15 megawatts, phase 2 would be 30 megawatts, and phase 3 would be potentially up to 160 megawatts of wind. They say that they're doing a wind feasibility study in the region, and then they also say that they have submitted a interconnection feasibility request to hydro. And so it's not like the most massive, sort of like when we're talking about data centers, for example, we're often talking at least 100 megawatts per data center. There's lots of reasons that those should not be welcome to the province either. But in terms of getting it up to scale and assuming that they can actually achieve what they think they're going to be able to achieve in terms of efficiencies, it can add up to a lot of electricity. Next slide, please. This is from Deep Sky's literature. They talk very openly about why they have picked Manitoba to try out this project. They talk about the water, the geology, the wind, and the hydroelectricity energy making it ideal for engineered CO2 removal. And so they explicitly say it's powered by renewable energy. And I don't think, like they've said explicitly, and this is why they are, making this load feasibility application to hydro, is that they want to connect to the grid and they want to use electricity from the grid. Next slide. So direct air capture can also use a lot of water, and this varies based on technology. I mentioned the difference between the solid and the liquid technologies. So Deep Sky has said that it will use what they say is about a bathtub worth of water per ton of CO2. So it's about 0.18 cubic meters per ton of CO2 captured. So that works out to about 15 cubic meters per day for the first phase, 50 cubic meters for the second phase, and 250 cubic meters for the third phase. Just to put that in perspective, the province requires any agricultural, industrial, commercial facility that's using more than 25 cubic meters to have a water use license. And so as soon as it hits, even more than phase one, we would expect it to actually be using quite a bit of water. They do say that water is a byproduct of this particular process, and so they can hopefully recycle some of it. But again, grain of salt. Next slide, please. So the fourth issue is around the economic reliance on carbon offsets. So there's really two, so I'm talking broadly here, not specific to Deep Sky. There's broadly two ways that these companies can make money. The first is by selling the offsets to companies and governments. This is likely what Deep Sky is going to do. The second is producing the CO2 for industrial feedstocks. And there's a lot of different feedstocks it can go into, including sustainable aviation fuel. So there's a lot of big name players which have already bought offsets from Deep Sky, even though they haven't, really captured CO2. So this includes RBC, JP Morgan Chase, Microsoft, big players putting big money into this. And I think it's also relevant that Deep Sky co-founders started an online travel app, and so they're aware that the technology that they created is emissions intensive, and so they're trying to find a way to make it less of a concern in the future. So there are many forms of utilization. Again, not what Deep Sky is doing, but I think it's important to know. The sustainable aviation fuels, you take CO2, you combine it with green hydrogen, and you've got yourself sustainable aviation fuels. Very, very costly, very inefficient, but that is one way that they see this going forward. And then there's also things like cement production, greenhouse enrichment, or enhanced oil recovery. And all of these processes at best neutralize emissions in the atmosphere rather than actually provide genuine drawdown functions. And so if they were capturing it and putting it underground and not selling those credits to a polluter in order to basically neutralize, then there might be a case for why this could work, but that isn't the economic prospects that this company or any of these companies are looking at. Next slide. This is Deep Sky's own language for what they are they're looking at. They say demand for CO2 removal credits is rapidly outgrowing available supply. What they mean by that is that they actually haven't been able to capture enough CO2 and put it underground to actualize those credits. So they say they'll monetize Deep Sky by distributing premium, CDR, carbon dioxide removal credits to compliance markets, voluntary markets, and government procurement. The government procurement piece is of note, and I think it's something we should pay attention to, especially with the gas plant. I'll try to connect these two dots at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. And once again, we return to the opportunity cost piece. And so whether it, the province has said that they are not putting money towards this project. The company has said that the provincial government's not putting money towards this project, but something that we have seen the provincial government do is talk in a manner which is far too excited for the state of this technology. They've appeared in press releases that Deep Sky has put out. They have created this carbon capture legislation and seem very open to meeting with this company. And so we would argue that there is a higher level opportunity cost that is happening here. So it's not only the money, but it's also the attention that is being paid to this technology. This sort of technology will take a long time to develop, so many geological sites may not be appropriate for this. If there's proximity to old oil and gas wells, this can compromise the integrity of the system and may result in leakage, and Southwest Manitoba has a few of those. And then there's also opportunity cost around money, energy. The materials that are used for direct air capture projects can't be used for other projects that are proven and cost-effective and scalable. And so I'll say at the end, what some of our recommendations around that actually are, but we just don't think that this is a good use of all those things. And finally, the 500,000 tons of CO2, it does sound like a lot. It is about 2.5% of Manitoba's annual emissions, which is around 21.3 megatons of CO2. So even if they achieve their wildest dreams of half a megaton of CO2, it would help, I guess, but how much money and how much resources would go towards that when we know that there's other options available. Next slide, please. So this is specific to Deep Sky, but we have made a number of recommendations to government. One is that there's no tax credits, no public subsidies, and that can include discounted electricity. And none of that should be provided to Deep Sky. If they are truly going to do this, they should do it on their own dime. They will be receiving significant federal tax credits, and so that's out of our hands. We speak to the province mostly, but that's our first recommendation. The second, and this is actually specific to hydro, because hydro has showed a strange infatuation with direct air capture, is emissions modeling and planning should not include potential reductions from direct air capture until we have a number of years in which large-scale projects have come online, and there's transparent data where we can actually prove feasibility. We would argue that government should not use the prospect of direct air capture as a rationale to maintain or not address or even expand what they call hard-to-abate sectors, because this is why direct air capture often gets talked about is, there's going to be hard-to-abate sectors like air travel, shipping, plastics, petrochemicals, these sorts of things. And so we would argue government can't use this as a way to stall. And then finally, investments in cheaper and more readily deployable climate policies that actually help people and promote affordability and job creation, all these sorts of things should be prioritized over this. Next slide. So things to watch out for on this front. There's proposed amendments to the Carbon Capture Storage Act. We don't know when these are coming, but something to keep an eye out for, given what Deep Sky has been asking the government for. Eventually, if this project comes to fruition or close to fruition, there will be an Environment Act proposal and impact assessment process. And then there's the provincial budget, which is March 24th, this upcoming Tuesday. We don't expect there to be, explicit tax credits announced for this sort of thing, but it's always worth just checking what they're willing to put their money behind. And then there's a possible connection of the Deep Sky project to provincial commitments to the net zero electricity grid by 2035. And so, as mentioned, depending on how often the gas plant is used, hydro has signaled that it is interested or open to using offsets to neutralize the emissions from that plant. And so this is something that we need to watch for in terms of how politicians talk about it, in terms of how hydro talks about it, and in terms of how Deep Sky talks about it. Next slide, please. So we would argue that there's a number of alternatives to this particular trajectory. I'll just blaze through these, and then we can get to questions. One is clean energy. We know that there's energy that works that isn't gas-fired power plants. This can be wind and solar. This can be energy storage, so we're talking grid-scale batteries, compressed air thermal storage, and interprovincial transmission. There's energy efficiency, and this is something that is often really not appreciated as much as it could or should be. These are things like retrofitting buildings, and so insulation, air sealing, upgrading windows and doors, installing ground source heat pumps, and stronger building codes and compliance. I'll talk about why that matters in just a second. But again, one of the reasons, or the main reason that hydro has made the case for this gas plant is because of the reliance of Manitoba, or much of Manitoba, on electric heating. And so, buildings, residences, industrial facilities. And so by making the energy use that we use as efficient as possible, we can reduce the amount of energy that's actually required to come online. The third is kind of a wonky one, but it's called demand response. And so this is a way of basically shifting when electricity is used through incentives, through a whole bunch of pricing mechanisms. There's what's called smart meters, and these are already ubiquitous in almost all of Canada. Manitoba has 0%, Ontario has 95%, BC has 100%, and so this is another way where electricity can be used more intelligently, and we don't have to have as much new capacity come on the grid as once. Next slide. So clean electricity can meet peaks. Again, there's a whole report on it at the back if you're curious and learning more. The map there is about solar irradiance and just the potential for solar. As you'll see, it is by far the greatest in southwest Manitoba. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba are the cream of the crop in terms of the ability to generate massive amounts of solar power in the summers. And so that's also true of wind. That's why St. Joseph, St. Leon has been built where it is. These represent significant revenues for landowners, job creation, and economic development potential. These are things that we will not see with the gas plants. You know, these have the prospect of actually expanding the benefits and the affordability. Wind speeds are highest in the winter. They're also highest at nighttime. And contrary to the claims of hydro, this could be used really advantageously to meet the peaks when they're most needed. And I don't think I have to explain to anyone that sunlight is greatest in the summer and at daytime. And so the reason I bring this up is that these two technologies can correspond very well for each other. Wind can be increasingly relied on in the wintertime, solar in the summer. Combined with grid-scale energy storage and in tandem with the hydroelectric reservoirs that I mentioned, Manitoba can meet its growing electricity demands, and especially when we bring in the piece about energy efficiency and demand response, which I'll go into so quickly. And I have like 2 or 3 slides left, and then we can get to questions. Next slide, please. So one of the sort of things that I and Kat constantly talk about is electrifying heating, but doing it in a way that is as efficient as possible. So that graph may be a little difficult to see, but what it shows is the breakdown of space heating in Manitoba based on Winnipeg, where gas is available and where there's no gas available. And so the blue there is natural gas furnaces, and so most of the gas that's burned in the province to heat homes, to heat stores, commercial facilities is in Winnipeg. A lot of the homes and the businesses that are operated with electric furnaces or electric baseboards, there are some in Manitoba, or in Winnipeg rather for sure, but a lot of them are outside of Manitoba. And so this is a, next slide please. This is a issue because electric resistance heating, which is using an electric furnace or a baseboard, it works for sure, but it's an inefficient use of electricity compared to what other options are available. So ground source heat pumps or geothermal heat pumps are really coming back in Manitoba. There's a lot of talk about them. I just attended the first Manitoba Geothermal Energy Alliance conference, which is industry-wide conference, which they hadn't held since 2007 or so. And so this is because of some government interest in it, but it's also a lot of consumer interest in it. I won't go into the technical details too much, but there's a couple of different kinds. Basically, you are using the heat and the cooling in the summer of the ground underneath your home in order to heat and to cool it, and well-designed, well-installed heat pumps achieve efficiency that's 3 to 4 times that of electric resistance heating. So this is a huge opportunity to reduce peak demand of homes, businesses that are on electric resistance heating. And there's already many examples. I list the ones in Winnipeg, but there's a lot outside of Winnipeg as well, including in Morden, in Brandon. But the Forks, the Manitoba Hydro Building, Canadian Mennonite University, IKEA, a lot of very large commercial buildings have used it because it's extremely cheap. It's high upfront capital costs, which the government is increasingly helping out with, but it can provide stable and highly efficient electric heat throughout the summers and the winters. Next slide. So the priority that we would argue is that we need to be doing things like electrifying transportation, buildings, and industry in the most efficient way possible. And the reason I bring up the efficiency is there's good ways to electrify and there's bad ways to electrify. We think that promoting things like public transit in Brandon, but also intercity transit is a really good way to do this. And also efficient buildings, so using things like ground source heat pumps. If we were all to convert all the housing stock to electric baseboard heating, that would create a electricity demand crisis. But if we were to do it in an efficient and an intelligent way, we could be saving a lot of electricity and reducing the amount of investments that we have to make in generation capacity. So this would reduce Manitoba's emissions. It would improve affordability by reducing the reliance on highly volatile fossil fuels, and we only have to look to what is unfortunately happening again in the world in terms of the impacts that that can have. And it can create many jobs and regional benefits. And so this is really back of the napkin math, and some of it is actually more expensive than what it would be if we did it again today in terms of the declining costs in battery storage. But instead of one gas-fired power plant for $3 billion, we could have 30,000 ground source heat pumps. We could have 250 megawatts of wind, so we could double Manitoba's wind capacity, and we could also have 275 megawatts of battery energy storage. And so that's not, precise modeling. That's more just to give an example that there are other ways that we can use the $3 billion than what we're currently looking at in terms of that trajectory. Next slide. This might be the final slide. If you're interested in giving the government a call on budget day, which is Tuesday, we're doing a phone blitz, a sort of rapid response to the budget. And so we are going to give our ministers a call and let them know what we think of the decisions they've made in their budget, which is really, where it all becomes reality, or we can figure out if they're just talking a big game about this stuff. And so if you're interested in doing this, you can go on our website and then go to the events page, and it's listed on there. So that was a lot of me talking. Next slide, I think, is the final one, just about contact information. If you're curious or want to get in contact about, I also have business cards at the front. But you can reach out to me there. We're also on Instagram and this website as well. So, yeah.
Thanks very much, James.
Sure.
Thanks. There we go. Thank you. That is a lot of information. Yeah. A lot of represents a lot of research, and gives a good sense of sort of the complexity of the issues being dealt with in both of those projects. So thank you for that. And given all the ground that was covered, I'm sure that that's tweaked a few questions. And so we have Ingrid has a wandering microphone. So she will be the one who will give you your 15 seconds of fame. Well, we may give you more than 15 seconds, right? If you have a question about what's been heard, it would help you understand what's going on a little bit better. Just raise your hand and Ingrid will find you. Oh, there we go.
What is the best way to get over to you on the side? Okay.
How do I?
It's on.
Hello. Okay, there we go. So about the gas plant here in Brandon, how's the natural gas going to get there to be used?
It will come from Alberta, and so it will come through the TransCanada, the system in which gas already comes to Manitoba. And then once it enters Manitoba, it's basically taken over by a hydro subsidiary called Centrogas, in which it will be brought to the plant and burnt there. It's the same gas that a lot of Winnipeggers use in our gas furnaces, and so it'll all come from Alberta. And so questions there about the future of Alberta and the decisions they might want to make about their jurisdiction, and so I think that's part of the question as well.
But there will, I think, as you mentioned earlier, there has to be a new pipeline built to bring the expanded amount of gas required. Right. I think it's at the meeting I was at where Hydro was presenting the project, they said a 2-foot pipe to the plant. Yeah, that's right. And then there will be another 1-foot pipe to expand the amount of natural gas for other purposes throughout southwestern Manitoba. So there will be extra cost to installing the new supply of gas through that pipeline.
Yeah, and that's part of where the $3 billion price tag comes from. So it's for the power plant, but it's also for the additional pipeline and transmission infrastructure as well. Yeah.
Okay. Other questions?
Yes, great presentation. For the new gas turbine plant, could you comment on its water use, and what sort of wastes will that gas plant produce that we have to be concerned about?
Yeah, for sure. So these gas turbines are they do use some water, but it's not nearly the same amount that combined cycle or like other power plants will use. And so water is a concern for other kinds of power plants, I would say it's not as great a concern for this particular power plant. I would say the main waste product, aside from carbon dioxide, is the nitrous oxide or the nitrogen oxide, just in terms of the air pollution that is entering the atmosphere. So yeah.
Other questions?
So what kind of bad interactions could we see between the pore space storage, I guess you call it, and then possibly wells, oil wells, or
Sure.
future exploration? Is there a concern?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, when we're talking about direct air capture and carbon storage here, but when they are searching for an appropriate geology, they will try to find one which has a really solid cap rock, and so when they inject it underneath, basically it will settle and spread, and it will sit there, ideally, for hundreds or thousands of years. The concern with if there's pre-existing oil and gas wells, basically the carbon can slip out and re-enter the atmosphere. And so that's of a concern in terms of the effectiveness of the carbon capture and the emissions tracking, but it can also have other local impacts. If there's a high stream of CO2 that enters a livestock field or something, that could have an impact for sure. And in terms of active drilling, I imagine that there will be sort of a buffer around wherever they're injecting in order to prevent that from happening, because if there's any sort of destabilization of that, and that would include fracking or any sort of underground movements of geologies, that would for sure change the permanence of it, to put it lightly. So I imagine that's part of what the negotiation is between the province and the government, is around creating those sort of buffers to try to limit that. But a lot of the information is tightly held or tightly protected. So, but it's a good question. Yeah.
Okay, since I have the mic,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a question.
Sure.
Sorry, I see you. I'm coming to you. But I'm just curious, like, if you had yourself, you've done so much research and have so much knowledge. If you had a dream project
Sure.
of what like a beautiful renewable project could look like, what would that be?
Whoa. I think there's really interesting work being done. This maybe doesn't directly answer the question, but in what's called agrovoltaics. And so it's the integration of solar panels, especially with agricultural lands in which where there's grazing livestock. And the reason that can be beneficial is because it provides shade. It can also improve pollination and biodiversity in the area. And so it's like quite an interesting integration of solar. So there can be some on-farm generation in addition to providing local biodiversity benefits. So that would be a small scale one. I think I'm really kind of been nerding out on like energy storage just as a concept lately, and so I think there's some really fascinating projects happening in Ontario. There's one called the Oneida Energy Storage Project, which there's a great company called NR Store that we've met with, and they're really lovely people. And one of the very interesting things about that is this very strong Indigenous ownership and participation in that. And the technology itself is agnostic, like in the sense that it can receive electricity from any generation source and basically store it until it is most needed and inject it back into the grid. So that can be, to deal with temporary fluctuations in the grid, or it can be at peak capacity shortfalls to sort of inject a bunch to keep people's lights on. So that's maybe not like the most sexy or attractive one, because it is at the end of the day just like a big sort of piece of machinery in a field. Yeah, it's a box in a field. But I think it's a really interesting example of how a lot of the challenges that these technologies in terms of wind and solar have faced in the past are increasingly addressed through the much larger sort of battery that we keep in our pocket that is expanded to grid scale. So yeah.
Thank you.
Just one comment, no mention of electrical vehicles, how it consumes power and whatnot, just a comment.
No, for sure.
Yeah. The other one is about wind and solar power, which I like, but I'm always concerned about all these batteries that have to be for the environment and whatnot, you have to do something with them eventually, like, for electric vehicles and whatnot.
Yeah.
What's your thought on the batteries, when their life ends and those type of things?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. In terms of the recyclability of it, this is a sector which is increasing the more that end-of-life batteries are happening. And this is true of wind turbines and solar panels as well. There are processes which are being developed which allow for a lot of the materials to be captured and to be reused. There are some which have proved to be extremely challenging. So for example, the carbon fiber, this isn't directly answering the battery question, but the carbon fiber parts of the wind turbines, which are incredibly strong, you can't easily break those down. And so it's a question of, what do you use those for? And so they can be used for pedestrian bridges or, all sorts of different things. And so it is a good question. I think it's one that we have 20 to 25 years to figure out. And because this is like the grid scale batteries are just coming online now. It is like e-waste is a real concern, and it's one that is also relevant to things like data centers as well. And I would just say that there are industries that are growing in which these questions are being worked out. And there's also incentives for the companies to do this as well, because the more that you can actually recycle the materials, the less that you have to pay for raw materials, which can be pretty pricey. So it's a valid concern and a good question. I think there is a lot of work being done on it. So yeah, for sure.
You maybe can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that there are already at least 2 lithium battery recycling facilities going in Canada.
Yep.
One in Toronto and one in the Vancouver area.
For sure.
At least, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, on a very small scale, we know that there has been battery handling done for God knows how long in terms of just, just like little small AA's or whatnot. Mm-hmm. So this, it's not the same, but in some ways it is the same. So yeah, the technology is there for sure. Yeah.
Other question there?
Yeah, on the batteries, at Ag Days, we heard that there's a chance, pretty good chance that there's a dry cell battery that can be rechargeable very quickly. It will not freeze and has a long life capacity. Mm-hmm. And that's new. I hope that that's correct and will come online, but that would mean that you really wouldn't need lithium.
That's right. Yeah, no, there is a lot of fascinating work being done in terms of the battery chemistry. So lithium ion is by far, as you mentioned, the most popular, and the reason for that has historically been to do with cost. The cost of lithium has declined, but it is starting to bounce back. But there are new technologies in terms of sodium ion batteries, which use salt, which is quite a ubiquitous material, and one of the great benefits of that is it works really well in extreme cold, and it has very high round-trip efficiencies. And there's also a really fascinating technology which is coming online for a somewhat unfortunate reason, which is a big data center in Minnesota. But Google just procured or just put down money on a massive, what's called an iron air battery. And so I'm going to oversimplify the technology, but it's basically rusting and derusting and between 2 cells, and by doing that they are releasing and then capturing, depending on which way it's going, the electricity. And it's a massive project. Like it's bigger than any other project that has been built in the US so far. So to your point, there are alternative materials. It doesn't have to be lithium per se, whether it's sodium or iron, or there's a lot of options.
If you want to go down a wormhole in renewable energy, like one of the big ones is around battery.
For sure.
Around batteries, because there are hundreds of different chemistries being worked around worldwide. Somebody hoping to get the breakthrough that'll supplant lithium.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, James. Another great presentation. James came out to Pipestone in November, and there was 250 people in our hall. He gave a wonderful explanation on what direct air capture was. You've tweaked me a couple of times with a couple of things you've said. when you're talking about, I'm wondering, what came first, the deep sky
Mm.
proposal or this power plant
Oh, yeah.
proposal?
Good question.
Because we know that deep sky needs the power.
Mm-hmm.
And when you mentioned they might be working in tandem for the power plant to get the credits,
Yeah.
right? So I think our community in the arm of Pipestone has a lot in common
Mm-hmm.
with what's going on here.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think we need to be aware and be supportive of each other
For sure.
on talking to our politicians and seeing what we can do
Mm-hmm.
to rectify what could be happening here.
Yeah, no, thank you for that point. Wouldn't that be the great irony if the power plant was powering the direct air capture facility, which was capturing the carbon from the, it'd be making someone money, I guess. So Hydro first proposed what was then the 500 megawatt plant in February 2025, and then it was upgraded to 750 megawatt in November 2025. And so I'm trying to remember when Deep Sky first announced, was it the summer or the fall of 2025 in terms of? Okay, yeah. So I think Hydro had come out with that, and I think one of the things that has been difficult for us to make sense of in terms of the rhetoric is Hydro will say, this is just a peaker plant. It's just going to be used at, a couple hundred hours per year. But then politicians, such as the Premier, will say this power plant is necessary to drive the economic development of Southwest Manitoba. And so when we hear that, we can't not think of the direct air capture facility or other large-scale developments such as AI data centers or that kind of thing. For example, the AI data center that's proposed for just south of Winnipeg, they are talking, I won't go too far down that rabbit hole, that's a different rabbit hole, but they're talking about being both grid connected and having natural gas, like on-site natural gas turbines, which is its own problem. But they speak very highly of Manitoba's electricity grid and the reliability of it. And so given the way that the government has talked about what they see as these projects and why they're really enthusiastic about them, it's tough for us to take Hydro at their word that they're just going to use it during this very limited window, and especially when they're saying there's economic benefits to this, right? So I think you're definitely right to flag that, and it's something we're going to be watching for closely.
Thank you for your presentation, James. I have a statement or comment of research I've been looking into to do with the oil industry, where they've tracked the injected CO2 for enhanced oil recovery to see how far it travels. And they injected about 1,600 tons of CO2, and this is in North Dakota with EOG Resources. And it only took 11 days to travel 1 mile through the formation.
Wow.
I can't imagine what 500,000 tons is going to travel in 1 year, let alone 30 years of operation.
Certainly, yeah.
To me, that's very concerning for the oil industry.
Yeah.
You can imagine geysers of CO2 popping up in every single well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, no, and
I'm not a geologist, but
no, and I remember when I came to Pipestone as well. One of the questions was obviously around aquifers and groundwater, and if I recall correctly, one of the responses from the company to one of you maybe even was that it will make like fizzy water sort of thing, right? Which, we drink carbonated water and that sort of thing. But for the community not to know, how significantly it might impact groundwater, I think, given the potential mobility of the CO2, like we've been told, time and time again that once it's under the cap rock, it's going to stay there. But it's like, who knows? It's a big question for sure. So no, thanks for that research or that piece of.
There's a question from D on the live stream, which is there any possibility of damage by weather, for example, wind or hail, of this CO2 capture?
Interesting. I think that's probably true of most industrial facilities. I imagine that. So direct air capture facilities are mostly a field full of gigantic fans. Like that's how they suck in the ambient air. And so I imagine that there could be some damage done to it that way. I don't think it would impact the actual like carbon capture itself, but if the hail was bad enough, I'm sure it could make some dents. So yeah, I'd have to look more into that, but thanks for the question.
What about the noise on all of these fans?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I imagine it could add up. I haven't seen actual studies of it, but I imagine that if you live nearby, you would hear it. I mean, that's one of the things that we hear about data centers as well, is it's not something you'd necessarily think of because it's just like a big warehouse full of servers, but apparently people who live in close proximity to it, like noise is a huge issue. So yeah, I think that that could be a concern for sure.
Also, where are these 700 construction workers going to live?
Great question. Yeah. I don't know if the company has thought that far ahead. I don't know if any folks from Pipestone could speak to that, but you know.
In November, he told me that they were in talks with some patent.
I was gonna say, yeah, like that they could make like a man camp's not the right word, but you know, like a, yeah, some sort of like industrial, like accommodate, yeah, like, yeah. No, exactly. I think one thing that, it's not directly relevant to your question, but something that folks have pointed out is that in the, well, you'll see it in the top right image, that the facility, which is all fans, is just sort of in this pristine field, and there's no farms, there's no people or communities or anything around it, and so they've kind of just like visually parachuted into this, and I think are maybe not thinking about those sorts of questions. Yeah.
Does it deaden any of the growth around this? Taking carbon out of the air.
Yeah, good question. I don't think so because it's gonna, because it is like a relatively small amount of CO2. Like, you know, when it adds up to 500,000 tons per 500,000 tons per year, it's not nothing, but because it's from the ambient atmosphere rather than from particular sites, I don't think it will have a dramatic impact, but yeah. No, thanks for your questions.
Other questions?
Burning questions? Oh, we have one more over here.
Next time when we have a meeting, can we find a place that actually has a parking lot?
For sure.
We need, yeah, we need a parking lot with live streaming capabilities.
People in Pipestone
Right.
and these rural communities.
For sure.
Having it out there again.
For sure.
We got parking there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, thanks.
Yeah, yeah,
I got cracked up about having to walk back to my truck, which is like 2-3 blocks away.
right, yeah,
For sure.
right, yeah, yeah.
Sure.
I attended the meeting at Pipestone where Deep Sky was doing an information session, a collection of information for themselves, and I asked the company, and they did admit that they could do a lot better in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and by using other technology, and you know, just basically to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for the amount of money that they have. And so they recognize themselves that they could be much better things done with that money. And I think that's the path that they should go, is get off their butts and do something useful.
Well, again, the fact that the scientific brains of the operation left the company to do something else and said to media that this technology is just not advancing fast enough, I think should tell us all we need to know. Like, you know, they sell a very good story. Like we have taken a meeting with Deep Sky. We may have been talking to the same person that you did, and they are very good pitchmen. Like they do sell a very captivating, you know, story. And I think they've successfully sold that to a lot of really big companies, and so they know that there's a lot of money to be made. The question between A and B is how they're actually gonna do the thing, which is not clear to me. Right, yes, yeah, to the RMs, right, yeah.
So I notice we're a little past 8:30. Maybe we'll take just 2 or 3 more questions if people have them, and then move towards our closing. Any other questions? Maybe we've got all the burning questions answered. Oh, no, there we go.
It's more about demand metering or whatever you want to call it. I mean, curling rinks and so forth use that now. You know, they're charged more when they use the high demand, and then
Yep.
they're somehow less when it's, I don't know how it works exactly.
Yes.
But I think that's probably a good way of going, like in your houses and whatnot. If this is going to be, maybe I'll cut my demand down when it is cold.
That's right, yeah.
And
No.
I think that should be looked into more, probably.
There's a lot, again, it's strange that Manitoba is such a laggard on this, because it's not like we have to look far to see these sorts of programs. So whether it's in Ontario or BC, they will pay people not to use as much energy during those peak hours, and so it's incentives through your billing. So you'll pay less in order to use slightly less during those times. And there's also ways of, like, for example, like preheating a home. So it's a couple of degrees higher on your thermostats before when hydro knows it's going to be a peak energy crunch, and it will be just as warm as it would be otherwise. It's just less being used at that present moment. So there's a lot of programs and incentives and ways to do this that benefits ratepayers, that benefits energy consumers. But for some reason, hydro just hasn't pursued those, and is now basically threatening that if we don't build this gas plant, that people are going to freeze, which I don't think is a very fair way to do policy or to make these sorts of $3 billion decisions. So, but you're right, yeah. There's also at the industrial level, there's a program that Hydro runs called the Curtailable Rates Program, and so it does the same kind of thing. So for the very large power consumers, they'll pay them just to take their industry offline for a couple of hours, and then the company will be incentivized to do that. So there's ways around it for sure. The final piece I would say on that is Deep Sky has said that they can or will participate in that curtailable rate, sort of taking it offline at moments of peak demand. Again, they talk a big game. I think part of the reason that there may be some element of truth to that is because it seems that their technology cannot work in the deep freeze. And so that was part of their argument was, it might just be good for us to do that.
Yeah.
However, when we're thinking about AI data centers, they want to be online 99.999% of the time. That's how they market themselves. And so when we're thinking about peak demand, we have to really wonder how that's going to be balanced with potential data center loads as well. So yeah. Why is it needed?
There's some people online. So
I can repeat the question, yeah. It was just a question around why are AI data centers needed. This great question. Depends on your view of AI. So chatbots like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. Basically, those data centers will train models, and then those models are deployed to try to answer complex questions in an increasingly autonomous way. And so as anyone who uses Google may have noticed, or Gmail, or literally any online technology, there's now, everyone's being basically forced to, in terms of like the auto response, where it'll do the AI summary at the top of Google searches or whatever. So that's a great question. Why is it needed? I think it has to do with the same thing with direct air capture. It's going to make people a lot of money. There may be some small social benefits to it, but it is not at the scale or the pace that is currently. And so that, I mean, that's one of the things that we would argue is like we really need to slow down and make sure that whatever is being done is actually benefiting people, as opposed to us just being told or it being forced onto us. So yeah.
Yeah. Maybe a good way to.
we have one more.
Sure.
Our final countdown.
Final question.
One more question.
Sure.
Given that we're in an energy crisis induced by war,
Yes.
potentially,
Yeah.
aside from that, even before that, it seemed like Manitoba is under heavy inflation with food.
Yeah.
And we're also under hydroinflation of 11% over 3 years.
For sure.
Do you think, in your opinion, do Manitobans have enough cash in their pocket right now to pay for both?
To pay for both the power plant and the director,
The
or to pay for food and energy?
Food and energy.
Oh.
Inflation against their wages that they're making.
Yeah,
not
no, it's a
getting
great
the same
question.
amount.
It certainly seems not, no. And that's like cost of living and affordability is a huge crisis that is pushing a lot of people into using food banks or to making active decisions between whether they buy a certain product at the store or can afford to pay their energy bill. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, huge question that has to underpin basically all of these discussions. And so that's why when we see projects like a $3 billion gas plant that is going to be used for a percentage of the year, it really forces us to wonder what that may do to ratepayers' bills down the line and whether that is the best use of public money. Because at the end of the day, it is our money, right? And so, yeah, huge problem in terms of affordability and what we're seeing right now in terms of escalating gas prices and food prices. Like, we're just seeing the start of it now, right? So it's like, it's a very important question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way to end with the idea in our minds and the thought that whatever projects are being proposed, whatever decisions are being made, that really at the top of the list is a priority of making sure that things serve the public interest.
Yeah.
We all have a stake in these projects and the decisions that are made, and so it's a huge public service for James to come out and share the information that he's gathered and offer the perspective that he has from all that hard work. And so for that, we thank you very much, James, and to our whole climate team.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks, everyone.
And thanks to you all for coming out and being engaged in the process of learning and discussing. And we're all in it together, folks. So let's hang in there
And I'll just let you know, Quentin, if I can butt in, someone asked online that just came on, this presentation will be archived on the Green Team playlist, which is on the Knox YouTube channel.
Okay, the Knox
So if you know someone that wanted to be here tonight that missed it, or you want to go back and review some of the slides, it'll be archived on our YouTube channel.
Knox United Church YouTube channel under Green Team. Okay, thanks folks. Safe drive home, or safe walk home, which